And for those who don't know, my name is Bruce Merkin. I am co-chair of Defend Public Health's Communications Committee. I'm going to keep this introduction fairly brief and turn things over to Jennifer very quickly because she's going to be leading the training. But I do just want to set the stage very quickly. Couple of things to say. First of all, if you have been paying attention to the news at all, and I'm sure most of you have been, you probably know this is a completely insane national media environment right now. I have compared it to being stuck in the middle of the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once and trying to send out a press release through every dimension of the multiverse at the same time. It really is that crazy. But opinion pages, especially local opinion pages, are a place that we really can make ourselves heard. And our members have been doing it all over the country. Our folks have had stuff published everywhere from New York to Kentucky to Texas to California to Oregon, Arizona, everywhere in between. And we need to keep doing it. We need to keep doing more of it. And we don't, as an organization, we don't want to and don't have the capacity to micromanage it. We want to give you the skills and the confidence to go out and talk to your own communities and turn you loose. And that's what this is about. I should mention before I forget, we are recording this because we want to make it available to the folks who can't be here today. We've got folks literally in every time zone in the US, and not everybody can be here. So this is being recorded. Just a couple quick things before I turn it over to Jennifer. One is that just about anywhere that you submit an op-ed, they will want a one-line bio. And we do encourage you to mention that you're a member of Defend Public Health. Obviously, you want to say something else about why you're qualified to be writing about these subjects. So it could be something like Jane Doe, MD, is a Cleveland Clinic oncologist and a member of Defend Public Health, a national network of researchers and healthcare providers. If they give you more space, you can go on at greater length, but something like that will do. We do have a big project that we'll be talking about at the very end about cuts to NIH research grants and the HHS wave of terminations that just happened, and we'll talk about that more at the end. I don't know whether or not we will have time for Q&A, maybe not, but if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll get to what we can. And other than that, I'm going to shut up. If you got the invitation to this, you know Jennifer's bio, so I'm not going to repeat it. I'm just going to turn it over to the fabulous Jennifer Averill.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight or today or tomorrow morning, wherever you are. Bruce, thank you so much. And thank you, John Schaefer, for handling technology on this call. So I'm looking at my face right now. So actually, I'm not positive where we are in the deck. But if we could just go to slide 2, I will talk about my bio for a second. So I'm Jennifer Averill. Jen is fine. Oh, there we go. Thank you, John. Next slide's cool. Great. So I've been doing this a long time. Bruce and I have both been doing communications for quite a long time. My background is in nonprofit healthcare and technology. Communications kind of covers everything for me, from internal to public relations to marketing. I started out, so I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a lifelong New Yorker from the Bronx originally. And my career really started with technology and not-for-profit, believe it or not, sort of a very even split. I did independent contracting for a long time. And then in the 2010s, I became a floor member of ACT UP New York for several years. From there, I got involved at Queens College. I got a master's in media studies for social change. And my interest has been for a long time healthcare advocacy. So I was the director of advocacy at Housing Works in New York, if you're familiar with them. Fantastic HIV, AIDS, and homelessness organization here. And I currently work at Warner Communications, which is a kind of a corporate PR firm, but my work and more of that's in the bio that Bruce sent around, so I won't go into that. But everyone is affected by everything that's happening. I work with tech clients who are in environmental and sustainability technology, they're affected by the current presidential climate, to put it mildly. I work with a nonprofit for disaster relief. They're affected. All my folks in education, all my folks in healthcare, like all of you, are directly affected by what's happening. So I'm really happy to be here with you. Hopefully you'll take away a little something from this. This is going to be an overview, really high level, of how to write op-eds and letters to the editor, why we do it, what the efficacy of it is, and a little bit about structure and storytelling. So that's me. We can go to the next slide. So we're going to start by talking about storytelling. Storytelling is one of those things where we're steeped in it all the time. It's such a part of our everyday. It is changing a lot in media. It changes all the time. We are living through a time of extreme, as you all know, mis and disinformation, and that is permeating storytelling. We're also in an extreme time of lack of truth telling in storytelling. And it can feel sometimes like telling the truth is not going to be helpful, but it absolutely is. That's still what I believe we need to do. So the truth is on our side. Next slide. So this is someone I adore, and I thought I would just start off with referring to Marshall Gans. Some of you may be familiar with his work. He is I wound up quoting a lot of people from the Kennedy School here, so I apologize. I'm not myself Harvard related, but Marshall Gans is an author and a senior lecturer in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government. He's an organizer, and he talks a lot about storytelling in his work. So this quote is a favorite of mine. I think it speaks to, especially in the work we're doing now at DPH, and within any other groups that you may be involved with, or at your own workplace or former workplace, that we're inspiring one another to action. We are communicating our values. Storytelling at its core is the sharing of experiences or events, whether they're real or fictional. And storytelling helps us drop into other people's experiences by reading about them or watching them. It helps us to connect and relate to one another. So that is at the core of anything that we do in communications, and particularly with the kind of writing we're going to talk a little more about tonight. Next slide, please. Okay. So storytelling as a tactic. Few things here. So storytelling can be used, or the way we're going to use it, or the way I would advocate for using it in the context of an organization like DPH, is both as an individual and a collective tool. So there's the idea of the story of the self and the story of we, our story. What is happening in our community? What is happening to our communities? What do we see in our workplace or in our area of expertise, and how can we share that with people in a way where they will understand it better and be moved. I want to talk a little bit about what an audience is, and this may seem like an oversimplification, and please, jump into the chat throughout if you have questions. Bruce will keep an eye on that, and I'm happy to kind of address anything about a particular segment of the presentation. So audiences can include our own networks, targeted segments of the public, legislators. I'm not a big believer in the general public. There's a great HIV activist and writer and artist, some of you may be familiar with, Greg Bordowitz, who said the general public does not exist. And it can be a problem if we try to speak to everybody simultaneously in the world, everyone, everywhere, everything, everyone, everything, all at once, as Bruce was saying. Because the general public, if we start trying to target the general public, that general public is imaginary, and it often is neutral. And when it's neutral, that really means it's coming from a place of oppressive power, or, from whiteness, from maleness, from the general public as it's conceived by the television media is white, affluent, male, straight, etc. So we want to know who we're talking to, and we want to combat dis and misinformation. I'll talk a little bit next about how the opposition constructs power and how we can disrupt those narratives. So storytelling also, not relying only on data, and using the data to tell a story, I think, is something many of you are probably fantastic at, and I want to encourage that. to communicate the problems that we're seeing and the goals for change in a way that people can hear. So certainly you understand data and how it's moving and how it's changing, how it's being taken away in a way that most people don't, and that's a strength. But also using that data to paint a picture is very important. You may have heard of the 3.5% rule. Really briefly, that comes from another great professor of public policy at Harvard, Erica Chenoweth, who says that no government has withstood a challenge of 3.5% of their population mobilized against it during a peak event. So again, we don't need to change everyone's mind. We just have to get more people on board and activated. That's kind of how I see the goal. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So narrating toward action, getting a little bit more into how to construct your story, and then we'll get into the details of op-eds in a couple slides more. So this is taken from the Narrative Initiative, which is a great group. It's a recent article they wrote in response to the first 100 days of the Trump administration and beyond. And it's called Narrative Power in Crisis, How to Narrate Toward Action. I do have some resources at the end. They're not linked. I'm very sorry I didn't have time to put all the links in a document. I meant to do that, but I'm happy to reach out and follow up, or my email's in there if anyone's interested. So part of what Narrative Initiative is talking about here is they put together these kind of short, easy bullet points, really specifically in response to what's happening now, as an alternative to traditional activist content that often lays out the threat at great length. So you might see the threat discussed for maybe 90% of your op-ed or of your opinion piece, and then 10% is kind of, and now take this action, write your senator, click on this link, things like that. So the argument here, and I really like this, and I think this is important, I think laying out the threat is fine. We don't need to shy away from that threat. But start with, or at least make sure somewhere in the body of what you're talking about, there are solutions. Solutions activate people. The possibility of solutions activate people. Talk about real people rather than abstractions. Again, use data, but connect it to people. We're going to use an example a little later of an op-ed from a DPH member that does this beautifully. So we'll kind of talk you through how he did that. And cut the problem down to size. Try to present the problem and then move on to the storytelling. Make that call to action a real call, and I love this in particularly. Show some of the people already taking action or organizing around this issue, if you can tell the story of, here's how this group of people was let go from this agency, and here's what they're doing now, or here's what they need you to know, or here's how they would ask you to act. Use concrete examples. Images are useful. We don't recommend, and you'll see this a little later, when you reach out to editors, necessarily adding attachments. That can be annoying, but you can certainly offer them, and you can offer data if you have any kind of images that are useful, and avoid jargon. So Bruce and I were talking about this, and this comes up in our work a lot. Understanding it can be hard to translate from the type of language that you use every day, especially if you're in academia, if you're in public health. I often work with organizations that are on the technology side with engineers, and it can become shorthand that you don't even hear anymore. So something we recommend to folks is something Bruce likes to say that I love is, and you correct me if I'm not getting this correct, Bruce, but when you're writing, write as if you're explaining this to your best friend who doesn't work in your field. I also have a colleague who will, when she's working with highly technical information, write the piece, write the article, and then literally call her mom and read it through to her or email it to her and talk it through together and see what she doesn't understand. So it can, learning, sort of having an ear and an eye toward what needs to be broken down a little more is going to go a long way toward connecting with people who might not be in your field. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So just a little bit about dominant narratives. So this is Douglas Rushkoff, who's a futurist and writer, and he was my professor, and he's great. This is another quote I really love. So this kind of explains it. A dominant narrative is an explanation of or story that is told in service of the dominant social group's interests and ideologies. I think we're in this really interesting moment where the narrative we're working to break itself is not truly dominant, but it could become so. It feels, I don't love this word, but it feels a little squishy what's going on right now. Even those in power, in some cases, are shocked by how events are unfolding. Certainly Trump, Musk, everyone, overtaking these agencies we love and care about and have done great work for. They currently are the oppressive power that we're up against. But there's this strange thing of they're not necessarily adhering to, they are the construction of power, but they're not necessarily adhering to what the GOP perhaps has been saying for 40 years. So it's a very weird moment. So dominant narratives use storytelling to protect dominant power. And if we can understand it and what they're saying, we can create a counter narrative, which is what we're trying to do. Okay, next slide, please. So just a quick word about framing. And Berkeley Media Studies Group is another organization I would recommend if you want to learn more about narrative and storytelling and those things. Readers come to stories with ideas already in their heads about the way the world works. So this is their conceptual frame. Talking again about dominant narratives, they create dominant frames. We can reframe something. So for example, like personal responsibility in healthcare is a framework some of you may have seen and be familiar with. It's a really narrow view of health equity problems. If there is a problem with healthcare or with your health, it's on the individual to address it. It's on the individual to seek alternative methods of care. You can't trust, public health or public health officials, whatever it might be. That's such a narrow view. So you can expand or shift the frame through your expertise. So for example, same problem, health equity, there's this idea of personal responsibility. You can start to show what the root causes are. You can start to show in your writing solutions that work. You can say, what happens if we shift to this idea of personal responsibility? What happens if we start to use alternative solutions and remedies for the measles? What's really going to happen? So that helps break down that power, gives people a new story. So that's the idea of frames. Folks can have a hard time letting go of their frames. So often we have to repeat this many times from many different places. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to get into why you've all come here, which is op-eds. So this originally meant opposite the editorial page. You'll see opinion pieces sometimes, and we'll talk about this a little later, but also op-eds do not have to be a narrow category. I think certainly in my field of work, and for some of you too, when I think of op-eds, I think of the New York Times, I think of the Washington Post. As Bruce stressed at the beginning of the call, and I'll stress again a couple more times, the town or city where you are and your local paper is extremely important. And the op-ed there that you could place there is extremely important. Healthcare journals, medical journals, healthcare trade magazines. There's all sorts of possibilities. And one resource that you'll see at the end is the op-ed project. And they do have a list of vetted newspapers across the country with information on how to contact them. It's not the longest list. We would love to try to build something bigger, but wherever you are, you look in your local paper or the paper in the town over or near you that you are interested in writing for, and just look online. It's usually pretty easy to find who the contact is and what their guidelines are. But honestly, you can also reach out to me. I use a platform through my job where I can find that out for you pretty easily as well. All right, next slide. So you may have seen on the DPH listserv go around this op-ed training from Italia. I'd recommend it. It's a lengthier training and much more in depth than what we're discussing here tonight. This is the op-ed structure, sort of the basic idea of how to break down an op-ed. So you'll start with your lead, which is also your hook or your thesis. So what are you addressing? I think there's a little freedom to have the lead, and we'll see this in the example that we give, be more of a storytelling lead. So that lead could be, this happened on Friday night, and a quick description of what it is that happened, and then go into your thesis. So this is not, completely static in the approach, but the idea is start out with what you're addressing and what your core idea is. What follows is the bulk of the article. So that's your supporting argument. It's usually several paragraphs. So this idea is specific to Italia, but I have seen it in some op-eds, is the counter argument. You're kind of saying what the opposition might say, or the to be sure paragraph, which is another way to think about it, and then cutting that off at the pass. So it's acknowledging there's a counter argument, it's acknowledging its existence, which gives you balance, and then continuing. And then your paragraph 6 is the conclusion, which is sort of a restatement of your lead. It can summarize what you've discussed. 600 is usually, I would say, if I had to say what an absolute average is of op-eds, it's probably 600 words. 500 to 750 is kind of the range you'll see. Every publication will tell you very plainly what the word count is, and absolutely stick to it. If you can't reach it, see how you could build out the piece. If it's too big, work with an editor. We have a couple people at DPH who are volunteering, including myself, to edit op-eds for folks who are interested. We might build out that list of volunteers, which would be fantastic. There's also something I'll refer to at the end. The op-ed project has an Ask an Editor session once a week. It's kind of a drop-in where you can submit your op-ed, and they do live editing of a few people who they've chosen. So that's great if you want to work with a professional editor and don't have another way of reaching somebody, but it's also good to, I think it's almost like being in a short little writing class where you can take a look at what other people are doing and how they structure it and get a better idea of how you might achieve that. All right, next slide. Thank you. Great. Okay, one sec. All right, so this is general guidelines. This in general is what you will see, but again, every newspaper publication is different. Make sure you're looking at the newspaper publication where you want to submit. We don't recommend that you submit to more than one publication at a time. This isn't like, a news pitch. Definitely want to work your way through publication by publication. So always tell a timely story with a strong point of view. Turnover for op-eds and opinion pieces for local publications is very fast. It's usually a week. The New York Times, I would actually build this out, because if it's part of a larger story, like let's say you submit a pitch, an op-ed to the New York Times, something I have seen happen is they might be working on a series, or they might be working on something from the board of the magazine, and that only in those very rare instances would you see this be more than 2 or 3 weeks. I did work on a story with the Times where it ended up taking about 6 weeks to publication, but that is rare. So if it's just you're submitting this as a person with expertise in your field, those are kind of the guidelines in general. Again, can't stress this enough. Look up the requirements for a specific publication. They're all going to vary. So you'll contact your op-ed editor, or whoever the contact is, which could be a sort of general-ish email address with a short pitch. We'll talk about pitching in a moment, followed by the op-ed in the body of the email. So 2 things about that. Followed by the op-ed most of the time. If your publication that you're pitching stresses in any way, start with a pitch and we'll get back to you, do that. don't then send them the piece. So in those instances, you don't necessarily have to have a completed piece. You could just have your base idea and see if there's interest. But generally, you're pitching everything. That second part in the body of the email is a little unusual these days. We're so used to attachments and links. In the body of the email is still generally the accepted way to do this. Again, check your requirements. If you're accepted, that turnaround will be fast. So again, think through as you're writing what you're responding to that's happening in the world, in the nation, in the zeitgeist. But as things are shifting so quickly right now, we are again in a somewhat unusual time where the news cycle just keeps accelerating exponentially. So being able to speak, I think, also to the slightly broader theme of what generally is happening in public health with Doge, whatever it is to point to it, is probably a good move right now, but that hook should be about something that has happened recently. Absolutely do your research. Again, feel free to reach out to me if you're curious about a publication or not familiar with it. I probably can't help you too much personally in terms of like very regional publications, but happy to help you with the bigger folks as well as healthcare trades and verticals. Look for tone, look for the kinds of stories they're telling. But reading between 3 and 5 op-eds that have been published, we'd recommend recently, not kind of going back over the years, but within the last, 6 months or so, as a general rule, will give you a sense of what they're looking for and of how you can codify and arrange your story. If you're rejected, happens all the time, first of all, so it's okay. We would recommend that you consider another publication in the same area, or again, a longer lead publication, like an opinion section in Healthcare Dive or another trade like that. Again, review the new guidelines, edit so that it fits that publication, give it another try. Always write with plain language, as if you're writing to a friend. Have it reviewed by someone not in the field if you can, as we said earlier. The exception to that might be a medical journal. Let the examples you read be your guideline. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So little reiteration, we've been over this. I just love this slide because does anyone remember those things that are in the photograph? Those are printed newspapers. National newspapers, local newspapers, healthcare trades, medical journals. And something I didn't mention previously, university and college public health publications, especially if you are currently working in a university or a college, if you've previously worked there, if it's your alma mater. I think those are all generally good guidelines for reaching out to a public health publication affiliated with the university or college. They can be a little trickier for someone like me to find on the going through a journalist platform side, but their websites should make it easy, and you could even call their alumni office to get information. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So what's in a pitch? This is taken from Rethink Media. The general advice in communication circles is for pitches to be short and succinct, and it seems like the advice as time goes on is just for them to be shorter and succincter. They keep getting shorter. I don't know if that's attention spans, if that's to some degree reporters' times are just so taxed and editors' time is so taxed. There's probably a volume issue, but especially because in a perfect world, the editor you're reaching out to will go on to read your entire story, your entire op-ed after the pitch. Keep it short. Boil down what you're speaking about and make it something. An editor's job ultimately is to provide their readership with things that are relevant, interesting, and vital to their everyday lives, which certainly we can make the case. All of you can beautifully make the case what you're writing about falls into that category. So it's not extremely hard to do, but it's important that you get that across in just a few sentences. Pitching is a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. Some of the resources that I have at the end go more into pitching. You can look up more things online. But generally, the basics are: what is the relevance and importance to this outlet's readers? You can even say the name of the publication. Why should their readers care, and why now? What's the relevance now, which I think we can speak to. Why you're qualified to comment on the topic. So for example, if you're a policy expert, if you've had personal experience, this is your field of study, and so on. No more than a few sentences. And as Bruce said earlier, include your author bio and mention you're a DPH member. That would be fantastic. Okay, next slide. Thank you. All right. John, we have a hot link in this, and so I'd love to jump to that and kind of walk through it with folks, but I'll just say a little bit about this article first. So we're going to walk through as our example, Why America Needs to Hear About Lesotho by Patrick Smith, who's a DPH member. This was published recently in the Progressive magazine. You might have seen it when it went around on the listserv. It was syndicated nationally, and it ran in at least 25 outlets that we know of, which is terrific. And it's a really beautiful example of what we're talking about. So let me come back into come here. And John, can we jump off and share that link? And if not, I can open it and share my screen. And hi, everybody. Thank you. Very cool. Okay, so there's our headline at the top, Why America Needs to Hear About Lesotho, which immediately, if you had been following the news to this point, and Bruce, I'd love it if you have any additional insights, please feel free to jump in. No problem, John. Thank you so much. If you had heard about this, you would immediately ping, oh, President Trump just spoke about this. I heard that. If you haven't heard about this, your interest is piqued. Why do I need to hear about it? I don't know what that is. So then the subhead is great. The Trump administration's cuts to U.S. aid funding endanger the lives of millions and imperil decades worth of healthcare progress. Okay, that's a really good subhead. That is probably something I think it might make sense to mention here, is that sometimes what's in your pitch can be repurposed for your article. So you certainly, but I would only do that if you're pitching and then sending an article, not if you're sending it together. You don't want the lines to match up. But this itself is a great pitch for this article. This is what this is about. So we can go down. The op-ed writer, Bruce, tell me what you think about this. Generally, yeah, it's DPH member Patrick Smith's piece. Patrick did a beautiful job with this. That's why we're using it as our example. And I'm sorry, so the previous question was just, oh, how much control do you have over the headline? Typically in newspapers and in the press in general, you have none. Op-eds are the exception, and opinion pieces, often you do. They may tweak it. Bruce, would you say that's been your experience?
Yeah. Let me jump in here. Is my sound on? Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Couple things about this really fast. Yeah, this was one of our members, and he came to me in some frustration. He had originally written a longer version of this piece, which he had pitched, I think, to the Boston Globe, and they didn't take it, and he was frustrated. It happened to arrive at a time when I was really busy and I didn't have a whole lot of time to work with him directly, but what he had written in its longer form was really beautiful and really important. I had seen what Trump had said, and it had pissed me off no end. But I had worked with the folks in the Progressive in the past. I knew they were really, I knew this was the sort of thing that they would like. And they have this project where they work with the Tribune Wire and syndicate op-eds nationally. And so I pointed him to them, and I didn't have time to really help him shape it, but I figured that they could work with him, and crossed my fingers And happily it worked out, and it landed, I forget everywhere, but it landed in South Carolina and Texas and Louisville and the Sacramento Bee and just all over in the heart, a lot of places in red states where Trump got a lot of votes and people really needed to hear this. And this was written by a guy who's a nurse who worked in Lesotho, saw this stuff firsthand. And I just was really proud that we were able to get this published. And to answer somebody's question, most of the time, writers unfortunately don't get to control the headline and subhead. The folks at the Progressive will usually listen to you. They are really responsive. In my experience, um, they will edit it, but if you push back, they'll listen, and if you're reasonable, they'll meet you halfway. A lot of newspaper editors won't. They'll do what they do. That's life in media land. And you take what you can get. Okay, back over to you, Jennifer.
Great. And Bruce, since you were so closely involved with this story, again, as we're going through it, if you'd like to jump in at any point because you have a lot of insight, please do. I also just wanted to mention that I'm looking in the chat now. I'm at the point in my life where I can do exactly one thing at a time, and that's about it. But Andrew, thank you for your great question. I see that John and Bruce addressed it. So Andrew Forsyth asked about how long to wait. I think the advice you got here was great. I will say I spoke with a colleague of mine prior to, as I was putting this deck together, to get her advice because she's someone who really taught me a lot about op-eds, and she was a little more cagey about this question. If you want like real days and times, I'd say if you haven't heard anything in a week, I agree with Bruce. I would reach back out. Never be afraid to follow up. There's a host of reasons why folks just genuinely don't see emails.
Yeah, if I can just jump in again,
Yeah,
what I usually do is I just send a polite email just saying, hey, just checking in, want to find out if this is still under consideration. And
exactly.
honest to God, I have sometimes heard back, I don't remember seeing that. Can you resend
Same.
it? Stuff happens. Some of these guys get so many submissions that they lose
Yep.
track of stuff. So don't assume if you don't hear that it means they hate you and they're not using it. Mistakes happen.
And I've had the exact same experience. I think a lot of comms folks have had those experiences. It's very normal, more so as, like I mentioned before, the news cycle just gets faster and faster. And we're kind of even beyond like a 24/7 news cycle at this point. I know 3 years ago, it was extremely interesting to folks in my field that Saturdays and Sundays were game for news. Now 3 in the morning on a Tuesday is game for news, basically in this current iteration of the administration. So absolutely feel free to reach back out. Say a general guideline is a week to do that, to hit. My colleague who I spoke with, I think this guidance is the right guidance. Go one at a time. If they don't get back to you in a few days, email them, and then you can pitch elsewhere. That's fine. I do know folks who have pitched more than one publication at the same time when they're dealing with really high level, because it is unlikely, just because the numbers are so high in terms of the number of submissions they get. It's so unlikely. I don't recommend that, but some folks do. All right. So getting back, if we could go back to the op-ed. John, I know that might take a second. Just go over this a little more. And this was sent around on the listserv, so if you have a chance, absolutely take a look at it. Okay, thank you. So this is a great example, I think, of what I might call immersive storytelling. So it puts you right in the moment of sort of the horror. Midway through President Donald Trump's recent address to Congress, while listing initiatives he views as appalling waste, the president referenced $8 million Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of, and he mispronounced it. So again, if you watched it, you're right back in that moment. If you haven't watched it, you will have a reaction to this because it is quite egregious. Then Patrick moves to his experience and the importance of what is happening with programs there. He mentions his job and how he came to be there. So that's all within a sentence, that's all explained. Programs now threatened by Trump's blanket cuts to foreign aid with that link, which is, I'm guessing, a link to something else in this publication. It's very rare publications. There are some more topical publications, thinking like, the Daily Beasts and the Boxes of the World hot link out, but often publications will hot link within their own publication. So they've probably been covering this issue. Programs now threatened by Trump's blanket cuts to foreign aid. I did not see anything to laugh about. Beautiful, summarizes everything that the reader will be feeling as they're reading this. Now he goes into his visit, paints a picture again. He landed there in 2016 as a 22-year-old Fulbright grantee. What a beautiful country it is. Tells some personal stories that are brief, that helps you see both this country and the importance of his being there. And then it goes into Partners in Health and what the programming is. So as a reader, you've become invested in this story. You are walking along with the author as they go through this new experience. And now you are learning about their area of expertise. So this is really very expertly done. I traveled to 30 health centers. Now he's explaining to the reader what happened, what was achieved, what was accomplished with US grants, what he learned. There's a discussion, there's a brief mention of PEPFAR, what he did every day, how important this was to folks there, why it's important. So now we go into, this is more data driven, but because there's been all this narrative that is both personal and then public health oriented, the data supports the story, and vice versa. The storytelling has supported the data. Second highest prevalence of HIV, second highest tuberculosis incidence. These are very affecting statistics. Ninth highest maternal mortality ratio. This isn't some unimportant, unknown, meaningless country. This is a rich country full of important work being done for great reason. And it speaks to how hard people are working, which is something that a lot of folks can relate to. And now we have the results. These efforts have achieved massive decreases in HIV incidence and a 10-year increase in life expectancy. I think that's a great statistic to mention. Explain some background on the, Aurora, yes, I'll answer that question in a sec, thank you. Explains the background of the program. That program being established by George W. Bush is so incredibly important. It is bipartisan. It has remained bipartisan, as far as I understand from friends who are involved or were until recently involved with PEPFAR. And some of you may have been or be involved with PEPFAR. It remains, it has a lot of stakeholders. So getting that across is important because this is not just an issue for one side of the room. Now here's what the cuts will do. And here's what all this negligence will do. And while Trump's laughing this off, this is what's really happening. A lot of harm is being caused. So then the harm is explained and what it means. So then we can go down. So I love this ending. When Trump speaks of Lesotho, he does so without interest in everything that's been laid out for you now in this article. Without interest in the staff, supplies, or diplomatic partnerships that US investments have secured. Also great. He does so with an open disdain for the Americans whose life's work he upends. So these budget cuts are devastating internationally, and they're devastating to American workers who are just bringing their expertise to bear on the situation. He's doing this without compassion for the millions who will suffer. Sacrifices, and that's a heck of a line. sacrifices to a mispronounced punchline. So this is a very masterful example. I think Patrick and with Bruce's help did a fantastic job. So let me just pop into the chat for a minute, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. We'll go through. Can you explain again about hot links? That is, I think, a question you could ask the publication. In my experience, for example, writing an opinion piece, like if you're hot linking to data, if you're hot linking to, known sources of data in the past, myself or my client or the organization I'm working with will provide those hot links. Sometimes a publication, if they're hot linking within their own publication, they will add to that. And if you know a little bit about their stories, it can't necessarily hurt for you to provide that or link to them, but I wouldn't knock yourself out over that. Bruce, would you agree with that assessment? Yeah, Bruce mentioned it in the, yeah, it doesn't hurt to embed links in your manuscript. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So any questions about this? You can drop them in the chat. And we'll talk a little bit about letters to the editor, which are like very tiny op-eds. So you've already learned a lot about them. We'll get into that. Okay, great. We'll come back to the chat as we're going. Thank you so much, John. So next slide. Letters to the editor.
Okay, well, if we're done with that, and if people are still thinking about questions, we can catch up with some more at the very end. But I want to take a few minutes to talk about a specific project that Defend Public Health has going, which I mentioned a little bit about earlier, which is, as you probably all know, we have seen a wave of just really terrible things happening, both and NIH grants being abruptly cut off to hundreds and hundreds of researchers around the country, leaving studies cut off in midstream, researchers and patients left high and dry. And then thousands and thousands, I don't even know if we know how many altogether, workers at the CDC and other health agencies suddenly fired, locked out of their jobs, literally life-saving programs just abruptly ground to a halt. And it's horrible beyond words. And we want to get op-eds published about this as soon as we possibly can in publications all over the country. And we have started to organize people to do this. And we are trying as best as we can to keep track of that. And we have a spreadsheet to do that. I want to drop a link into the chat. And these can be from any point of view. If you are a researcher, if you are a clinician who has watched this happen in your institution, if you work at an agency that has had cuts, or if you have lost your job yourself, and I'm sorry if that's the case, if you're a patient in a study, if you're a family member who knows somebody, there's any number of angles this can come from. We really want you to, if you feel comfortable about it, write about your experiences, use the tools that you've been given about this today, and put the info in the spreadsheet so we can keep track. To the degree that I have the bandwidth, I am certainly happy to give whatever editorial assistance that I can. And somebody asked in the chat, is there a form to the sheet? I'm not sure I quite understand the question. There's about 7 or 8 fields which ask for it will empty out into a form that will tell us, where you are, what you expect to write about, where you think you might submit it, all that. And then, and it also asks whether you might be willing to do follow-up interviews if other local media happen to be interested in the story. And again, like Jennifer was emphasizing, really, emphasize the human impact of this. The folks in our infectious diseases committee are working up a fact sheet, something I think they're going to try to share with members of Congress and their staffs, but also which may be of use to you, which hopefully will have some useful facts and statistics. But again, don't make these mostly about facts and statistics. Use some of those to back this up. But the emphasis really is on the human impact and the damage these things are going to do. And again, feel free to contact me if you need more information about this. And I think that about covers that, but we hope that you can help with this. And now I should probably shut up again and let Jennifer talk about letters to the editor.
Okay. Preston, I just wanted to acknowledge your really good question. I'd be happy to speak with you more about that if it's helpful. Certainly, I would say protecting your privacy and your personal information comes first, and this is a public form of writing. So that ability to be tracked, I think, is minimized slightly by publications style, which can include linking out to someone's organization. It's very rare to see someone link out to someone's LinkedIn or social media, but you can be searched. So if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, I would say don't proceed. There's lots of other ways you can write, participate, and we can talk some more about that if you'd like. Okay, so letters to the editor. We'll go through this quickly. Yeah, submitting pieces anonymously. I think it's possible. You don't see it a lot. I think that is something where you could start with a search of the media you are reaching out to see if there's a precedent for it. I have seen it, but I've seen it places really like higher level publications where the implication is this is someone inside the system, like a whistleblower. So I think it is rare. I do think it is possible. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions. Please feel free to drop anything else into the chat if it did not. So letters to the editor. Letters to the editor, in a sense, are like tiny little op-eds, which is part of why they're included here. They're a great media tactic. They require a short investment of time. Turnaround's very quick. So a letter to the editor, you want to read the story, think through your response, and get that off within a day or so if possible. Again, read the guidelines to see how to submit. Chances of being accepted are higher than an op-ed, which is cool too. Being succinct gives you more control over the final product. So a publication may choose a portion to publish. If you were to write a very long letter, that gives them more, it's sort of like speaking to the media. If you're on television or you're on a podcast, they can edit and choose what your quote is the longer you speak. So if you're get your main point across and make it obvious throughout the letter and stay very focused. So what we're looking for is if you're in agreement with the article, say why. Like an op-ed, speak from your experience, support it with data if possible. Same thing if you're adding a new point. If you're refuting something in the article, call out the faulty premise, especially if there's mis or disinformation. You can call that out as being what it is. And then again, support with your data and experience. So these are kind of the basic guidelines. I read somewhere recently that a letters to the editor section, they would rather publish 10 really short letters than 2 long letters. That's kind of generally where they're at. And this is one where absolutely don't send the same letter to competing publications because there is a higher likelihood you'll get published, especially if you're in a smaller location. All right, next slide. So we're going to look just really quickly at a good letter to the editor that I found that's in your wheelhouse. So NIH funding cut could kill medical research. This was in the East Bay Times. And we can go to the text of the letter. So I thought this was great. So I just want to take you through it a little bit. Thankfully, courts have paused for now. The NIH's attempt to immediately slash the amount of money given to research institutions. So in a way, this is kind of what we talked about before. It's starting with some good news. However, here's what happens in the event that this doesn't hold. So you're getting that sense of urgency and tension across. If allowed to proceed, the loss of money will be a death knell for biomedical research. Absolutely. So then the author switches to her specific experience. Here's what's happening at my lab. It's funded by the NIH to test out this treatment. Then she goes into how that could personally affect the reader. Odds are, if you know cancer survivors, you know someone still struggling with chronic pain or other issues caused by chemotherapy. The only change I might suggest to this in general is, harkening back to what we talked about before, is to add if you or someone you know, because we can't assume. I think it is better to assume the audience reading this is everybody, and that includes cancer survivors or people who currently have cancer. And it would be great to address them directly and to help activate them into what's happening. If NIH cuts research, then here's what'll happen. Here's again how things can go wrong. We won't be able to find the funds to make up the shortfall. I'll have to fire scientists and stop our research. So this gets across very quickly. Here's the problem. Here's not the solution exactly, but here's what we need to prevent. Here's how it affects the work of scientists. Here's how it affects your health. So I think something to that too is like, it's great to talk about public health, but not every reader is going to understand what that means. So if you can talk about personal health as well as public health and balance it, that's a good thing. Research, and then that end line that ties everything together restates the thesis. Her conclusion: researching cures to improve America's health is not wasteful spending. Absolutely. All right, and then last slide, well, last couple slides, resources. So I think I mentioned all of these as we were going through it, and I will put together some links that can be sent out along with the follow-up. So you can all do some more investigating. Again, please get in touch with me if you want to just chat about this stuff. This is what I love to do. And I love talking about comms. So I'm happy to do that with anyone, anytime. And then my last quote is just kind of a little personal. And I think this speaks to something Bruce and I were talking about as we were putting this together, is how important it is to hear voices from across the country. I think especially now, it's going to be extremely powerful to understand how every state is affected, and all different people from different walks of life are affected by what's happening in public health. It's not just, it is folks in Washington, but it's not just those folks in Washington, D.C. So to that point, no matter where you are, this is one tactic you can use that is very effective, and no one way works. It'll take all of us shoving at the thing from all sides to bring it down. That is from my favorite poet, known as the only female beat poet. That's not exactly true. There was one other one, Diane DePrima from Revolutionary Lenin and Brie. All right, so last slide just has my email on it. Please reach out if you would like to speak further. And are there any other questions? Thank you so much for joining us. This has been fantastic.
Yes, and thank you all. We are, I think, just about out of time. So thank you. I hope this was useful. We have a very important story to tell. You all have important stories to tell. Go tell them. Go write. Start now. Spend your weekend writing. Thank you.